Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We're continuing our study of the resurrection events in the Bible. We've already discussed Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, Elisha, and the Shunammite woman and their sons who are returned to them. We've talked about Jesus and the son of the widow of Nain. This event further breaks the mold. We saw Jesus last time not having to pray to God to ask him to raise the son, but he raised him himself. And the great faith that produced. But it was very much in keeping with the other two events that we've seen in so many other respects, except that it happened outside and it was a public event. It wasn't a private event in an upstairs room, as the first two were. Well, this is another public event, and it's not like the other two accounts, the other three accounts at all. You can also find this reported in Matthew chapter 9 and Luke chapter 8. The widow of Nain's son is in Luke chapter 7. That's why we say that the first event is the raising of the widow of Nain's son, and the second is the raising of Jairus' daughter. Those accounts are identical to this account, except that Mark has more detail. In fact, it is only in Mark that we have Jesus' words in Aramaic. Talitha kumi, little girl, I say to you, arise. It's a long event, and it has a second miracle embedded in it, and the two are connected, and we're going to talk about the two of them together, and we'll look at this event today and tomorrow as well. So, we introduced it yesterday. Let's get into the text. Mark chapter 5, verse 21. When Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered about him, and he stayed by the seashore. And one of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up, and seeing him, fell at his feet. And he entreated him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live. And he went off with him. And a great multitude was following him and pressing in on him. And a woman who had had a hemorrhage for 12 years, and had endured much at the hands of many physicians, and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse, after hearing Jesus, came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak, or the corner of the tassel, really, of his prayer shawl they would have been wearing. She thought, if I just touch his garments, I shall get well. And immediately the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. And immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that power was proceeding from him, had gone forth, turned around in the crowd, and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the multitude pressing in on you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. And the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. And while he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore? Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken, said to the synagogue official, do not be afraid, only believe. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the synagogue official, and he beheld a commotion, and people loudly weeping and wailing. And entering it, he said to them, why do you make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep. And they were laughing at him. But putting them all out, he took along the child's father and mother and his own companions and entered the room where the child was, probably an upstairs room. And taking the child by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cum, which translated means, little girl, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began to walk. For she was 12 years old. And immediately they were completely astounded. And he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this. And he said that something should be given her to eat. Well, what an account, what an event. And then the surprise ending, she's 12 years old. He tells us this to explain how it was she got up and walked, because he's assuming we might wonder whether she's old enough. Because when the synagogue official comes, he calls her not just his daughter, but his little daughter, my little daughter. And he uses this diminutive to describe a small child, which of course in the end is exactly the way Jesus describes her as well. He's a synagogue official in Capernaum. The synagogue of Capernaum was the second most important religious site in Palestine. It's the biggest synagogue probably in the Roman Empire. And the black basalt flooring of the synagogue dating from Jesus' day is still there, and you can go see it. Probably nothing else of that original synagogue is there. He's one of the heads of the synagogue, somebody who is an official who manages the site, who plays a variety of roles. He's the vicar of the synagogue, and Jesus is not officially okay by according to the Pharisees. He's just not. But desperate times, desperate measures. I mean, this is his girl, this is his daughter, and she's at the point of death. And so when Jesus comes back from the other side of the Sea of Galilee after casting the demons out of Legion, when Jesus is on the other side, crowds there, he's immediately, they're surrounded by a crowd. The synagogue leader runs up to Jesus and falls down at his feet and pleads, come and lay your hand on my daughter, my little daughter, my baby girl, because she's at the point of death. And Jesus goes. But they're going in this crowd, and so they're being detained. The first miracle that takes place is the woman with the hemorrhage. She's had a hemorrhage for 12 years. Nothing's helped. She's only gotten worse. She is about as unclean as a person can be. Not quite so unclean as a leper, but unclean. She shouldn't be out there touching people the way that she is, but she works her way through the crowds, and she touches Jesus' garment, the tassel of his garment, the tassel of his, just touches it because she believes, if I can just touch it, I will be healed. And we have this great moment, and commentators don't usually recognize this, where we have an outflowing stopped and something else flowing out. The blood stops, but the power goes out, and immediately both this woman and Jesus experience the moment in their physical bodies. And there's something that passes between them, something that happens between them that they both feel physically. And so Jesus said, who touched my clothes? Who touched me? And the apostle said, you're being surrounded. What are you talking about? But Jesus sees her, and she comes fearing and trembling, and tells what has happened. And Jesus calls her what? He calls her daughter. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Shalom, go in peace, and be healed of your affliction. Well, I know we're in the middle of the story, but we've been nearly 10 minutes. We'll pick it up next time. Thank you so much for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.